after you've had a wonderful opportunity for productive struggle, is through information processing. So when we look at inequity in schools, what we really are seeing is this disconnect between teaching students to process information at higher levels. We want them to be critical thinkers and creative thinkers and be at the top of Bloom's taxonomy. But if we don't help the student build those dendrites and cognitive routines, knowing how to get unstuck when you get stuck, because all learners get stuck. Just independent learners don't freak out about it, and they have a strategy or two to get unstuck. So recognizing these are the tools that perpetuate inequity. It's not just implicit bias. That has an element. But more insidious is our inability to create rigorous learning for the neediest children and being able to get them up out of that pit because they can process information. I understand what an example of this would be and what a non-example also is, what it is and what it isn't, right? I see how this comes together. Oh, that's starting to make sense. That's what learners do that moves information from just being inert facts and figures to usable knowledge. And those are two very different things. That's the hallmark of equitable education. So here's the reality. We have to set things up in classrooms where children can experiment, where they have the opportunity to see how do things work. Because every time they do, they are building dendrites. Sitting, paying attention to what the teacher says and following directions does not build dendrites. And if we want kids to operate at higher levels, eventually academic language, being able to do that critical thinking, then we are going to have to let them experiment. And you can call that playing, but that's an engineer at work. And how do we orchestrate that and not freak out? As a teacher, that means we create these environments that allow students to actually move around and have that leeway. We have to reimagine our relationships with children. In my book, I talk about this as a learning partnership. Not only do you have to be friendly and build rapport, but how will you be an alliance? How will you actually be the mentor and apprentice the student into this work? My many trips to Alaska, this is where this picture is from, they're making traditional paddles. And the children are learning how to make the paddles that their foremothers and forefathers made before them. So they're passing along knowledge as well as working and learning what does it mean to use these various tools. Here are older children, again, using their indigenous knowledge, using their environment and the context to actually learn about environmental science, to learn some biology. This is contextualized learning, because when you talk about culture and coming from a collectivist culture, then what you get is this contextual orientation. What's the big picture? Whole to part. Too often when we think about culturally responsive teaching, we think, oh, we're just talking about social justice, or we're just talking about race. But we aren't. We're talking about how was a child's brain wired. Your nurture culture, the first 0 to 5, your brain is wired to take in the world through a particular cultural lens. So understanding more about that is also part of that adult-child relationship, shaping of that lens. So being able to help children actually organize and present their information, it's not just random information. This is an example of thinking about pets, but we're going to think about pets through the lens of our word study and through math, and because this is how the brain is organized. We call it schema, that we have a knowledge tree in our brain. How do we bring this to young children? Being able to help them see that you literally can grow your understanding when you allow them to use inquiry as the basis of their learning. They also need something really important and fundamental, and that is feedback. Where are the feedback loops? in your classrooms. And this is not good job. This is, oh, here's the learning target. Here's what we were working toward. You made it on these points, but in these 3 areas, you might want to go back and do some practice. You might want to go back and correct that. That feedback is timely, it's actionable, and it's an assessment for learning, not of learning. Did you get it right or did you get it wrong? We all rely on feedback to get better. How are we giving children that opportunity to get authentic, realistic, timely, actionable feedback in a way that helps them become better in their investigations? Inquiry requires a feedback loop. I tried something, did it work? And if it didn't, what do I need to tweak? That is how the brain learns. So being able to think about that becomes really important. And so if we think about inquiry as the great cognitive equalizer, there are a couple of things that we'd want to remember. This idea of curiosity over compliance. This is not about getting kids to be quiet while you go over some stuff and tell them what they should be thinking. This is creating an environment where it's okay for them to have a little chaos, to have the quiet hum of real learning where you hear the murmur of kids talking. And how will you orchestrate that? Where you're just not shooting from the hip, but you know you want children to engage in this kind of curiosity, so you set your classroom up to do that. Children that come from collectivist cultures learn by doing. So the degree to which you have real experiments, real maker spaces for them, becomes really important. The next is questioning over quiet. Where will the children get an opportunity to ask their questions, or to debate, or to listen to their peer or classmate? Because Vygotsky also talks about social cultural learning, that we learn better when we're talking to each other. Another hallmark of a collectivist culture, the opportunity to talk to stimulate thinking. The last is this idea of errors as information. Errors are information, not confirmation of low intelligence. So making sure that our children know that not only do we have norms of behavior in the classroom, but we have norms of cognition. That if we get feedback, we also are making mistakes, and that those mistakes are information. They are not some reflection of you as a learner. That has to come from adults. We help children know whether or not that is the case. And I want to leave you with this quote. This is Atwell Gawande. He is a heart surgeon and finds the time, God knows where, to actually write really thoughtful books. And this quote comes from the Checklist Manifesto, and he says, "Better is possible. It does not take genius. It takes diligence. It takes moral clarity. It takes ingenuity, and above all, it takes a willingness to try." That's really what inquiry is for young children. Let's keep trying and see what we learn. So being able to understand that we will get to equity when we give children permission to inquire, when we create spaces that will stimulate their brain, and when they have that level of intellectual curiosity. I want to stop there. I'm going to thank you for your attention and engagement, and I think we'll have an opportunity for some questions.